few products have changed my riding in the way that dropper posts have. There seems to be a small minority not yet on board with adjustable seat height Serenity, but I do think that it's just a matter of time. Now, how best do we live with our sliding sidekicks? This is Dropper Post Hacks. A clean interface can help us keep our seat posts where we want them without having to torque this bolt excessively. This was perhaps more of an issue with your first generation droppers, which would bind up if you torqued that bolt like crazy, but why make life harder than it needs to be? A nice clean interface using some kind of grip compound can really work wonders. So over time, gunk and grease can really dirty this area inside the shaft there. So I would use some kind of brake or isopropyl cleaner, something that's not going to leave a damp and watery residue that could potentially damage, especially an alloy frame. The second thing is your retaining compound. So something like a carbon paste, which is really good to minimize the torque you have to do at the seat clamp, or just an anti-seize paste on an alloy frame can be very useful indeed. And don't forget to torque check that to the specified amount on the seat clamp. A very thin suspension fluid can be your best option when you want to lube up the seal, which sits just beneath the collar there. Now, even the thinnest of suspension greases can actually add drag to the system. Normally, a bearing thins out the grease with the introduction of heat when it gets moving, but obviously we're not creating that same heat within our seat posts, so you really need to be wary of over-greasing and adding drag to the system, which our comparatively weak air spring won't be able to overcome. If you want to just do a quick bit of maintenance, you can use a silicone spray, which will help lift dirt from underneath the seal. But if you rely on this too often, you will over time potentially be flushing out any lubrication that came in there from the last service or manufacturing. So just watch out for that. So to do this is really simple. We're just going to undo this collar and slide it to the top. We're going to push our post down, and upon its return, it will help bring up this little bush here. So that's really simple. You either want to use that very thin grease sparingly or just some light suspension fluid. Now, one hack, which is a bit of a crowd divider, is actually bolting a second seat post onto the back of your saddle, which can be used to aid you if you are bike packing without risking a saddlebag rubbing your what is probably quite an expensive seat post or causing any damage. Now, aesthetically, it leaves a little to be desired, especially if unaccompanied by the mandatory hipster handlebar moustache and rustic hip flask. Now, Topeak do have this little gadget, which to be honest makes a far better fist of it. But it's really worth considering what will happen when you drop that seat post or if the rear wheel goes into its travel. So as good as they are, just be sure to do your homework first. Now, there is a bit of work stand etiquette when we're putting our bikes in a work stand. The first thing you want to do is make sure this surface is nice and clean. You don't want to be putting it into something which is essentially a sandpaper vise. There is a conversation going around about whether you want the front wheel to be hanging or propped up so it can take some of the mass off the internals of the dropper post. I think this isn't something I give too much credence as long as that post is at full extension, and I wouldn't advise storing your bike like that, but certainly just to work on it, I don't think it's too much of a problem. Some posts, however, are more susceptible to going saggy than others, so better safe than sorry if you have one of those posts. Sometimes whilst on a ride, you might get a little bit muddier than intended, and keeping grip on your controls can be an issue in itself. Now, some people like to use kind of sandpaper grip tape, although personally this does give me the heebie-jeebies. I'd much rather use something like the male side of Velcro, or you can, if you were so inclined, get some rubber mastic tape and just cut grooves in that in a cross section, and that can actually provide a surprising amount of traction on what would otherwise be a very slippery interface. Some people use an old inner tube to keep out the elements. Just be careful you don't end up trapping them in. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, this isn't my bag, not one bit. Functionally, aesthetically, the whole shebang. But if it helps you out, then why not? I would suggest maybe putting a mud guard on the rear to stop the dirt getting there in the first place, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just be really careful that in your efforts to seal the bad stuff out, you don't end up locking it in. Just think of Matt Damon's character in Martin Scorsese's The Departed, and you'll completely understand what I mean. If you like pina coladas and dancing in the rain, if you like making love, sorry, I'm getting carried away, but what I'm trying to say is, if you like doing things a little bit differently, then perhaps this is the option for you. A firm fan favourite, so much so, you've probably seen some more refined versions floating about on pros bikes, but it's basically a reconstituted 2x shifter from an old SRAM grip shift. Now, depending how much you want to spend, you can get one like this, which was about 20 quid, or you could go right up because they still make that XO level, which would be very tidy indeed. And all it does is it just actuates the bottom of your seat post via cable tension. So I think it's great. It looks super tidy and it's also quite ergonomic. When you're on a long ride and something goes wrong and your seat post starts to somewhat embody the ghost of the Okie Kokie, when you put your weight on it, it goes down. When you stand up, the seat post comes straight back up, meaning it's no good for either climbing or descending. Well, this is where one of these comes in, living in your backpack to save the day. What it does is it means you can clamp your seat post at full extension. Now, this might not be great for descending, but it certainly means you can pedal home with reasonable amount of efficiency. There now seems to be a whole host of companies that make aftermarket levers without necessarily making their own seat posts. You'll even see some bikes that perhaps have suspension or lockout systems, such as the Canyon Strive, that come with their own proprietary levers. Now, this goes both ways. So for instance, as long as the cable orientation is in the right direction, you could run a Crank Brothers seat post with a Fox lever, or vice versa, to suit your exact preferences. Using a toe strap to hold your rear wheel in place against a table leg or a work stand makes working on the seat post, especially the cable routing, oh so much easier. Now, it doesn't have to be one of these premium options that was lent to me by John Cannings, but rather any sort of strap, and it's earthquake proof, works a dream, and can make what is quite a finicky job just that little bit easier. A very easy and foolproof way to set your cable length is actually by turning your handlebars to 90 degrees and running your cable directly from the lever straight down, and so just enough emerges at the top of the seat tube. This means that by turning the handlebar to create some slack, you can always get your seat post out of the frame without having to then remove the lever. So with the handlebars turned 90 degrees, this line is certainly very tight, but it does mean we have just enough room to be able to work on the bottom of the seat post without having to disconnect the lever here. Surgical tubing is best, but a gear furrow with the end snipped off can also work really effectively. Now, Park Tool do make this really nice kit, but perhaps it's slightly out of reach for the home mechanic, so you can use some surgical hose to really push through new cables. So I really want to put the emphasis, you use it to push the new cable in using the old cable as a guide, but don't just go pulling the old cable because that isn't that tight of a fit. So slowly catchy monkey, or at least my friend from Hartlepool so expertly informs me. Now, this is unapologetically and undoubtedly one of your bodgier ones. But what it is a gear furrow that is used to hold a gear inner, which can sit at the bottom of your actuator there. Sometimes when you lose this piece, it's an absolute nightmare. Perhaps you want to go riding and you don't want to wait a few days on ordering one. Now, you can make them out of the metal furrows that you'd get on brake lines, and it is a far neater job. I've done them before with drilling them out, but I thought, Henry, not everyone has access to a drill or a whole workshop of tools, so how simply can you make this one? So I used a plastic gear furrow, a Phillips screwdriver and a pick, and over time, that just slots in there and that can sit just to the bottom of the seat post there. Maybe you need to cut some length off either side. But yeah, really bodgy, but it actually does work. So hopefully I've helped inform you on some ways to look after our dropper seat posts. Now I'm sure there's plenty I've missed, so please let us know in the comments. And if you want to stay with GMBN Tech, why don't you check out that really in-depth look of the new Shimano XT group set with Doddy, which is absolutely fantastic and is a really good watch. Alternatively, if you want something, well, perhaps not so highbrow, why don't you check out the maintenance video I did on keeping a bike in a flat or apartment.